Welcome to the deep dive. Lately, the cyber landscape, it feels less like just tech stuff and more like this really high-stakes chess game.
Definitely. And the players are getting more serious.
Exactly. We're seeing nation-state actors stepping up their game, and they're not just hitting governments anymore. They're going after essential infrastructure, private companies, basically the foundations we rely on.
It's a broadening target scope for sure.
Which brings us right to today's focus. There's this recently uncovered and importantly exploited vulnerability in Commvault Web Server software. It's got the designation CVE-2025-3928.
A critical piece of software for many organizations.
Right. But before we really get into the weeds, this deep dive is brought to you by Stonefly. They're a leader in enterprise storage, backup, and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions. So if you're looking for secure, maybe ransomware-proof storage, Stonefly sells air-gapped and immutable options. You can contact sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo.
Good to know.
Okay, so Commvault. For anyone maybe not super familiar, what's their main role? What do they do?
Yeah, Commvault is a really big name in data protection. Think of them as safeguarding critical information, helping companies make sure their data is safe, backed up, recoverable, properly managed.
Got it. The guardians of data, essentially.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to unpack this CVE 2025-3928. We want to understand how it works, how attackers used it, the potential fallout.
And crucially, what you, the listener, need to know to stay protected.
Exactly. So let's start where it began. How did this whole thing even surface?
Well, the first inkling came on February 20th, 2025. Microsoft actually noticed some, let's call it suspicious activity happening within Commvault's own Azure environment.
Oh, interesting. So Microsoft spotted it first?
Yeah, their internal systems flagged something odd, and they reached out to Commvault directly, gave them a heads up.
So that alert kicked off an investigation, I assume. What did Commvault find when they started, digging in?
They did a full forensic investigation, and it confirmed that the weird activity was because someone was exploiting a vulnerability nobody knew about yet, a classic zero-day.
Wow.
And that flaw, that's what's now officially known as CVE 2025-3928. Basically, a secret backdoor attackers found and used before the defenders even knew it existed.
A 0-day, always nasty. What was the timeline like from finding it to fixing it?
Commvault actually moved pretty fast on the patch. They got fixes out in late February 2025. But the key point is the vulnerability was already being actively exploited before that patch was available.
Right. That's the danger zone. Shows that race between attackers and defenders.
It really does. You can't patch what you don't know is broken.
And I heard this CVE also popped up on the government's radar. CISA, specifically.
Yeah, that's right. CISA, that's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They added CVE 2025-3928 to their KV catalog. That's the Known Exploited Vulnerabilities list.
Okay, KV listing. That usually means it's serious, right? It's not just theoretical.
Exactly. It signals this is being used in real attacks out in the wild. They added it on April 28th, 2025, and they even set a deadline for federal agencies May 19th, 2025 to get it patched.
That definitely underscores the urgency. Okay, let's get technical. What exactly does this vulnerability let an attacker do?
So the flaw itself is in the Commvault Web Server software. Essentially, it lets a remote attacker, someone not physically there, get a foothold.
Remotely. But they need some way in first.
Yes, that's important. The attacker needs to already have valid user credentials for the Commvault environment. Now, the access level needed is apparently quite low, which is concerning.
Low privileges, but still they need credentials, so the system probably has to be exposed to the internet or maybe compromised some other way first.
That's the likely scenario, yeah. Internet accessible and maybe credentials were phished or stolen through another method. But once they have those low privilege credentials,
Then what?
then they can exploit this vulnerability, CVE 2025-3928, to do something much worse, create and execute web shells.
Web shells. Okay, that term sounds inherently bad. Break that down for us. What is a web shell?
Think of it like planting a secret backdoor, a malicious script, directly onto the web server. This isn't just temporary access, it's persistent.
Persistent, like they can keep coming back.
Exactly. And through that web shell, the attacker gets a command line, essentially. They can execute commands on the server, they can steal data, upload more malware, and maybe even use that compromised server to jump off and attack other systems on the network. That's called pivoting.
So if the Commvault server gets hit, they could potentially pivot to, I don't know, financial systems, HR, anything connected.
That's the risk, yeah.
Yeah.
The web shell becomes a hidden operative inside your walls ready to act.
And you mentioned the severity rating.
Yes, the CVSS score is high. Depending on the calculation, it's listed as 8.7 or 8.8 out of 10. That definitely signals high severity. Big potential impact on confidentiality, integrity, availability.
Oh, a high severity. Which specific Commvault versions are we talking about here?
It affects the 11.x versions, specifically any release before the past ones. So you need to be on 11.36546 or 11.32.89 or 11.28.141 or 11.2.215 or newer. That applies to both Windows and Linux installs.
Got it. Check your versions, folks. And do we know what caused it, like the specific coding error?
The details are a bit vague, described as an unspecified security defect. Often, companies don't release the nitty-gritty details publicly.
Right, to avoid giving attackers more ideas.
Exactly. But these kinds of flaws often relate to how the server handles input from users, or maybe how it checks permissions. Something wasn't validated correctly, most likely.
Understood. Okay, so we know a nation-state actor is the prime suspect here. What about the actual attack? What was the impact, according to Commvault?
Well, the nation-state suspicion certainly raises the stakes. These aren't script kiddies. They have resources, often political motives. But Commvault has been clear on one thing. They stated they found no evidence that customer backup data was compromised.
Okay, that's huge. Backup data is their core business.
Right. And they also said there was no material impact on their own business operations. So, some positive news there.
But were any customers affected? You mentioned Microsoft spotted activity in Commvault's environment.
Yes, Commvault did acknowledge that a small number of customers, ones they share with Microsoft, were affected by some related activity.
Yeah.
They're apparently providing assistance to those specific customers.
So even if the backup vaults themselves weren't breached, these web shells, they still pose a major risk, don't they?
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
Even without touching backups directly, a web shell is a powerful tool. Attackers could use it to steal other sensitive data from the server or connected systems. They could deploy ransomware, maybe deface websites.
Use it as a launch pad.
Yeah, use it as a command and control relay for other attacks, or even rope the server into a botnet. The possibilities are broad, really depends on the attacker's goals.
It's a chilling thought, having that kind of hidden access point. So what's Commvault telling users to do? What's their response been?
Well, the primary response was releasing those patches back in late February. So the #1 recommendation, absolutely critical, is for users on vulnerable versions to install those updates immediately.
On which components specifically?
On the CommServe, the web servers, and the command center. Those are the key ones. They did note that client computers themselves weren't directly impacted by this specific flaw.
Okay, focus patching on the server side. Any other measures they're recommending? Beyond just patching?
Yes. They put out an update around March 7th, mentioning they'd also made some additional security enhancements to the web server module itself.
Good. Proactive hardening.
And, importantly, they shared some indicators of compromise, or IOCs, things to look for. Specifically, they listed 5 IP addresses linked to the malicious activity they saw targeting their Azure setup.
Ah, specific IPs. That's useful.
Yeah, they strongly recommend customers block these IPs at their firewalls. 108.69.148.10, 128.92.8.2.80, 184.153.10, but 80.80.212.21.20, 184.153.42.20, and 172.242.60.42.20. Okay, block those IPs. Basic security hygiene,
But essential if they're known bad actors. What about monitoring?
definitely. They advise regularly checking Azure sign-in logs, specifically looking for any access attempts coming from those 5 IPs. That can help spot trouble, past or present.
Makes sense. Anything else on the prevention front?
They also recommend using Conditional Access Policies. That's for Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, and also for Azure AD single-tenant app registrations that might integrate with Commvault.
Conditional access. That's part of Microsoft Entra ID, right? Formerly Azure AD. How does that help here?
Exactly. Conditional access is powerful. It lets you set rules for who can access what based on conditions like their location, the health of their device, the application they're using. It's like a smart gatekeeper.
So you could say block logins from unknown locations even if someone has the password.
Precisely. Or require multi-factor authentication for certain actions. It adds layers of security, making it much harder for attackers even if they manage to snag some credentials. It's a key part of mitigating risks like this.
Layered defense. Smart. Was there anything about passwords or secrets?
Yes, one more thing. They recommend rotating the client secrets used for Azure integration. Basically, changing those connection passwords between Azure and Commvault every 90 days and making sure they match up.
Good practice. Limits the window if a secret gets compromised.
Standard security hygiene, really.
Okay, stepping back a bit. This whole Commvault incident, it really seems to plug into some bigger trends we're seeing in cybersecurity, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder, I think, about just how sophisticated and, frankly, widespread nation-state cyber threats have become.
Like we said at the start, it's not just governments anymore.
No. Private companies, especially if they're part of critical infrastructure or hold valuable data or even just use widely deployed software, they're absolutely targets now, or sometimes just collateral damage in bigger campaigns.
And these nation-state attackers, they operate differently from, say, typical ransomware gangs.
Very differently. Usually, they tend to have significant funding, very skilled operators, and access to advanced techniques. We're talking 0 days, like this one, and what we call advanced persistent threats, APTs.
APTs, meaning they want to stay hidden inside a network for a long time.
Exactly. Long-term espionage, intelligence gathering, or positioning for future disruption rather than just a quick smash and grab.
Which makes detection and response even harder. It feels like this underscores the need for everyone to have a plan before something happens.
Couldn't agree more. Having a solid incident response plan is not optional anymore. You need to know who does what when an alert comes in.
Is there a standard approach people follow?
A really common and effective framework is the one from NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It covers key stages: preparation, getting ready beforehand; detection and analysis, figuring out what's happening;
Containment, stopping the bleeding.
right. Containment, eradication, getting the bad stuff out; and recovery, getting back to normal. And then, crucially, post-incident activity, learning lessons.
Learning and improving for next time. And you mentioned conditional access again earlier. How does that fit into the bigger security picture beyond just Commvault?
It's really a cornerstone of a modern security approach, often called zero trust.
Zero trust, meaning don't automatically trust anything, even inside the network.
That's the idea. Verify everything. Conditional access is a tool that lets you enforce that verification based on context, who, what, where, how you apply the right controls. It dramatically improves your security posture against all sorts of threats, especially those involving stolen credentials.
Okay. This has been incredibly insightful, really breaking down not just the CVE, but the context around it. If we had to boil it down, what are the absolute key takeaways for everyone listening?
I'd say number one, a critical vulnerability, CVE-2025-3928, in Commvault's web server was actively exploited, likely by a nation-state. It's a real-world example of the threats out there.
And even security providers aren't immune.
No one is. So the immediate action, if you use Commvault 11.x, patch immediately to the fixed versions. That's paramount.
And implement their other recommendations.
Yes. Block those known bad IPs. Look into using conditional access policies if you integrate with Azure Microsoft 365 and monitor those logs.
And beyond the immediate Commvault fix.
It just reinforces the basics. Strong access controls everywhere, continuous monitoring. You have to assume you might be breached and look for signs and have that incident response plan practiced and ready to go. Be proactive, not just reactive.
Proactive, not reactive. A vital message. All right, lots to think about there. And maybe here's a final thought to leave you with. In a world where even the companies protecting data are getting targeted by highly sophisticated actors, how confident are you in the resilience of your own critical systems, your own data? What assumptions are you perhaps making about your security posture that might need reevaluating in light of threats like these? Something to mull over.
Definitely food for thought.
And remember, this deep dive was sponsored by Stonefly, a leader in enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions. For secure, ransomware-proof storage, think about their air-gapped and immutable options. You can reach out to sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you for joining us for this critical deep dive. Stay safe out there.